So in this session, we're going to be covering what's new in PowerBuilder 2022 R2. First thing we're going to have is a legal disclaimer. Okay, let's move on. We're going to talk about the rich text edit control enhancements. So now there's support for form fields, and it includes a checkbox, a combo box, a text field, and a date field. It also supports tables and text frames now. And probably the most important part of this is once you've created a document that has these fields in it, the check, the combo, the text, or the date, if you save the document as a PDF, then when the user opens the PDF file, those fields become editable by the end user. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the demo of that now. So this is our rich text demo. There's not a whole lot to it here. I mainly wanted to show the editable PDF feature. So I'm going to create a form in PowerScript. I'm going to save it as PDF. And then I'm going to go and open up that PDF. And you notice the fields are editable. Anyway, so and just take a look at that code real quick. Not a whole lot to it, and obviously you're not the guy. I'm not the guy you're going to want to have lay out your forms for you. But that's pretty much it. So just setting up some of the options for the dropdown. Just stuck a bit of empty text into the rich text edit control, which is what this does. Then the select text, that's how you set the position that you're at. So I just started at 1-1, put it in the checkbox, moved over 40 spaces. This was the label for the checkbox, and then I put in the checkbox. Moved down to 2-1, put in my text, moved to space 40, put in my date field in that case. Same thing with the comma box and the text field. Okay. So that's the rich text edit updates. Okay, let's move on. New object now for doing native SMTP. Now, the thing I want to point out here is that when you're dealing with mail, there's sending mail, that's done through SMTP, and there's receiving mail, that's done through POP3. This new object does not support any of the POP3 functionality, which means you can't read email using it, but you can send email using it. It supports sending email through an SMTP email server. It supports the SMTP and SMTPS protocols. You can send the text in either an HTML format or in plain text. You can use any of a number of different connection types: none, start TLS, and auto start TLS. There's a number of different authentication modes: none. Some people set up servers where the only thing they authenticate is that the from address belongs to the domain for the SMTP server. So you could basically send email as anybody from within the company. You know, more sophisticated network admins might want to set some higher authentication for that, though. So you have auto, cram MD5, login, plain, NTLM, and XO auth 2 that are also supported. It supports sending emails in asynchronous mode, so you don't have to wait for a response from the server before sending the next email. And you can send emails through a proxy server. And I have a demo for this as well. So this is our SMTP client demo. And if you're familiar with the PBNI SMTP client extension I did a few years back, This window will look familiar because I basically took the example window I used for that and modified it slightly for demoing this new client, native client. One big difference here is the priority. So that was an option I didn't have in the PBNI SMTP demo. So the big change, though, is behind this button right here. So here we're using a native SMTP client object and creating that. You can see here's how we add the recipient, how we add carbon copy recipients, how we add blind carbon copy recipients, setting the sender, setting the subject. You can see you have a choice between setting the text body or the HTML body, depending on whether you want to send plain text or HTML text as the message body. You set the SMTP server you're going to connect to and optionally the port. Give the username and password if you're just using username and password authentication, which we're doing for this demo. And you can set the character set that's being used, and then add one or more attachments, and you can use TLS. And if you do decide to use TLS, there's a number of different secure protocols you can use. And then the new feature, different from my extension, is the ability to set the priority of the email message. And then the other big new feature that I didn't have in PBNI SMTP is the ability to use a modern authentication like XOAuth 2. So here's an example. We don't use it in this demo, but that's an example how you would set the access token for XOAuth 2. And then you can just then send the email. So let's go ahead and do that. Run this. And everything's already set up. So I'll just say send email. Get a 1 there. Share a ping here in a second. Just like that, and sure enough, that's the email that just came in. So it's working. That's the SMTP client. Okay, so moving on. HTTP client has some new features here. Set credentials. Get supported scheme that allows the client to ask the server what authentication protocols you do support, and then choose one that is mutually supported and use that. And then there's resend post request. What this is primarily for is sometimes a website will be set up so it does not allow pre-authentication. So what happens when you make a post request to it, it responds with a 401 error, which means you need to authenticate. And then you do the authentication, and then you resend the post request. And so that's what this feature is for. UI themes has been modified slightly. There's ability it has to do with how you set the theme settings for standard visual user objects and their descendants. So you can apply a theme setting that applies to the ancestor and the descendants, or you can set a theme setting that applies to the ancestor and then have separate theme settings that apply to the individual descendant user objects. So you have a little bit greater control over it if you choose to do that. Okay, autocomplete. This is kind of one of the bigger new features. This is for the drop-down data window and the drop-down list box. There's a new autocomplete mode property. It has 3 values: suggest, append, and suggest append. What it will do is in the suggest modes, the suggest append does both suggest and append. So in the suggest mode, it will filter the items in the drop-down to just those that match the characters that have been typed into the drop-down list box so far. The append mode tries to find a value in the drop-down list that matches what the user's typed so far and will auto complete the text entry. So if the option they're looking for then appears, they could then tab off and it would take that value. The one thing I would note is that if you're going to use this feature, particularly anything that uses the suggest mode, what you're going to want to make sure is that you sort the data in your drop-down list box or drop-down data window. The reason is because when the filtering is occurring, if the drop-down data window or drop-down list box isn't sorted, the order of the items in the drop-down will actually change, and they'll change every time a new character is entered. And it's a little disconcerting for the end users to see the options, flying around in different positions constantly. So yeah, do make sure it's sorted if you're going to use the suggest modes, either suggest or suggest append. And I do have a demo for this. Okay, so we're going to look at the autocomplete, and let's go ahead and see what I'm doing with this data window here. So I have 5 columns. They all have the same drop-down list box options. They are, in fact, using the same drop-down data window. Here, which basically just has the phonic alphabet. And so for the first one, I'm not using the new feature. I am just, it's just a non-editable drop-down data window. This is an editable drop-down data window, still not taking advantage of the autocomplete yet. Okay, see, it's autocomplete mode is set to none. The third one here, this is set to the suggest mode. Okay. This one is set to the append mode. And then this last one is set suggest append mode. Okay. So we won't save that little mod. And we'll go ahead and run this. And so this is your standard behavior for a non-editable drop-down list box. I should point out here at the bottom, what I've got is I'm using a code table, and just to show that as we make our changes here, what's not being put into the data is what's showing as the display value. It's actually the code value behind that display value, even though the user's entering text. And so I just have whatever the first letter is in the phonic alphabet going into this current data. So that's first, second, third, fourth, and fifth column. So here's our editable data window, or drop-down data window, and I could put in anything. Okay, but it doesn't match anything on the list, and so it's not going to be happy until I actually select a value off the list. All right, so let's change that to Bravo. Okay, so that's editable, non-editable, standard stuff. That's not the new feature. Here's the new feature. So I can type in D, and notice everything with a D is left. It filtered out anything that did not have a D in it. I say DE, and I get delta. That's the only option. I see A. There's everything with an A. Let's say D. Nothing new with AD. Let's do AR. So there's 2 that have AR in it. And I backspace, and it widens out the choices again. So it's filtering, but it's not auto-suggesting. It's not actually putting a value in here, even though alpha does match that as a first letter. So that is suggest. Let's go to append. Now we run it with append. Let's say I type in E. Notice how it's highlighted the entry that starts with E. I can say V, and it jumps down to V. So it's actually filling out the text for the option. So that is append, and then suggest append sort of combines, but kind of the clue there is by the name. It provides both of the features of the suggest and append. So I can say A, everything with an A in its left. It filtered out, let's say, my Echo and my Foxtrot and Hotel and Golf, because none of those had an A in them. And if I put in R, now I've got those same 2 options again. But because the AR didn't start off the letter the option. It didn't do the append, it just did the suggest. But if I type in something that begins with that letter, then it's doing the append as well. So it's doing the suggest and the append. Okay, hopefully I didn't confuse too many people with that. And so anyway, that is the drop-down data window feature. Drop-down data window autocomplete feature. All right. Okay, moving on. If you've been using SQL Server or SQL Anywhere, you know for quite some time they've supported an identity column, which auto-increments, the database auto-increments the columns. And what the data window had the ability to do, or still does have the ability to do, is you could provide, whenever you're creating a new row, you could send the row without a value for the identity column. The database would then set the value in that column, and then PowerBuilder would pull that value back and put it back into the data window. Now, Oracle didn't originally have support for an identity column. It's something they've added as they've been trying to lure SQL Server customers away. And so they added support for identity columns, but up until this version of PowerBuilder, PowerBuilder didn't support that identity column. That's been added now. So normally with the Oracle, what you would do, you would probably pop a sequence value from PowerScript, insert it into the data window for the new row, and then send the insert. But now you can, just like SQL Server or SQL Anywhere, you can leave that key column null, send the insert, and PowerBuilder will, the database will increment the column and apply the value, and then PowerBuilder will pull that value back and put it into the data window. Now, to do that, you need to actually, mark a column, the key column of the table, as being an identity column generated by default. The one caveat I'll throw out here is that for whatever reason, I can't imagine, I don't understand whether it would be used for this, but it's supported. You can create an identity column in Oracle that decrements. So you could say, let's start at 1 million and work our way down. That will confuse PowerBuilder, because PowerBuilder is going to look for the biggest value in that column. And so what it will do is it will grab the wrong value and put it in the data window. However, if you do a retrieve on the data window, that will retrieve the correct value. So if you are using decrementing identity columns for some reason, the workaround is that as soon as you do your insert, do a retrieve, and that way you will get the correct value. So this is a dialog out of SQL Developer, which is the free tool that Oracle provides for managing the database. And you notice that I have a column here that I've indicated is generated as identity. I've left the rest blank, which means it's going to start at 1 and increment by 1. And then this is what it looks like in the data window painter when I've, just by default, when I'm doing select against that table. PowerBuilder automatically recognized that there was an identity column and added it down here to the identity column field. It automatically marked it as the unique key column, and so it's ready to go. It will allow that column to be null on the insert, and it will retrieve the value from the database after the insert. And I have a demo for this as well. So this is the demo for the Oracle identity columns. So the first thing I'm going to do here, just go ahead and create another data window. Not a whole lot of tables in that database, but just the one I needed to do the demo here. So this ID column is from, you saw from the slides, is an Oracle identity column. So we'll go ahead and create the data window. And we'll go look at our update properties. And like I indicated during the slides, it automatically noticed that the ID column was the key column, but it also was an identity column. So it won't require a column value on inserts, and then it will retrieve the value that was assigned during the insert. So let's go ahead and see that operate. I'll retrieve the data. I'll insert a blank row down here. Create another user. I will update, and notice the value got automatically assigned. So that was the next value. I've been doing a lot of demos here, so that's why there's a big gap here, but that's the next value that got assigned for that user. And obviously, you wouldn't necessarily show the ID value for that you're using internal to your database to end users. That's really just for system integrity. I've got it shown here just so you can see that it's doing what it's supposed to do. Anyway, so that's the Oracle identity column. Okay, so moving on. Actually, this might be a good time to see where we are in the agenda. So we just got through identity columns. We're a little bit over halfway through, or a little short of halfway through. So the next feature is replaces a feature that was in the INET object, which was marked as obsolete in, I believe it was the 2022 GA release. It did have one function called hyperlink to URL, which launches the default system browser to a particular URL. And there's actually some value in that. The particular scenario I'm thinking of is if you use an OpenID to do authentication. The whole idea behind OpenID is that you've delegated authentication off to the OpenID provider. And so you launch the default system browser to the OpenID service, and the user logs in there, and then a code is sent back to the PowerBuilder application, which it then uses to generate the auth token. If you've got a sophisticated end user and you launched, let's say, a browser within the PowerBuilder application, they would be hesitant to enter their credentials because that means the PowerBuilder application could potentially read their credentials. So they would want to see the default system browser launched. And so we retain that capability through this new OpenURL system function. Next is auto decompression for the HTTP client and the OAuth client. This works for zip, gzip, and Brotli. And it works with the HTTP client, it works for the send request and read data method. And for the OAuth client, this works for request resource. What this primarily means is that if the server is capable of compressing the data, PowerBuilder now supports that. The server can send down compressed data, and the auto decompression just means just that. It's automatically decompressed before you see it, and you see the decompressed data if you're running through the debugger. That's what your code sees anyway. So now we're going to cover tabbed view MDI. It's probably one of the major new features of this release. So for the MDI and MDI help window types, there's two new checkboxes. One's called tabbed view, and one's called maximize tab sheets, maximize all tab sheets. The second one here will only be available if the first one is checked. Otherwise, it'll be disabled. So you have to hit tabbed view first. I generally run these both checked. When you're using tab view, it does look, I think it looks a little unusual to run non-maximized windows in the tab view mode. You'll see that here in a minute when I do the demo. One point here, though, is those attributes can only be set in the IDE. You cannot set them dynamically through PowerScript. And if you're familiar with the MDI frame, it creates a client area. I believe it's called MDI_1. And you can script that. And the same thing happens here with tab view for MDI. The tab bar for each of the tabs, where each of the tabs appear, that is automatically created as well. And that is called MDI TBB_1. And that can also be scripted. So there's some new properties on that MDI TBB1_1. There's a show icon, show close button, show separator, show text, show power tips, text size, and face name that you can all set in PowerScript. And then this is kind of what it looks like when you have the MDI tab going. So these are sheets in the MDI tab. There, I have them maximized here. This right mouse button pop-up menu is part of the new feature, so you can close multiple tabs simultaneously. There's a drop-down list over here on the right, drop-down button over here on the right that will show you all of the open windows and let you move to one. We'll go ahead and look at that here in the demo. So this is the tabbed MDI sample. As you can see here in the open event, I'm able to script the MDI TBB_1 and set some properties. If we go to here, there you see tabbed view, maximize all tab sheets. If I turn this off, that becomes unavailable. So we're going to leave that on. Run this. I just keep opening up the same sheet over and over again. So this is all the different sheets opening. Notice I can take this sheet and I can drag it over here at the beginning. I can close individual sheets. The right mouse button pop-up menu, and then there's also this one over here, so I can select sheets that way. All right, so that's tabbed MDI. Okay, moving on. Next, we have the .NET 6 upgrade. So some of the new features here in PowerBuilder require the .NET 6, and so if the .NET 6 SDK is not installed on your machine when you install PowerBuilder, the PowerBuilder install it will automatically install it. As I'll mention here in a minute, the ADO.NET database connections have been upgraded to .NET 6, which means that the only providers that are supported are SQL Server, Oracle, and ODBC. One big change in .NET 6, in the previous versions of .NET, there was a core and standard framework type. In .NET 6, it's consolidated. There's just .NET 6. There's no longer a framework type. So the .NET DLL importer no longer asks you to indicate the framework type. If you're going to import a DLL, though, you might want to make sure that you have upgraded to .NET 6 before you use the importer, just to make sure there's no conflicts. The ribbon bar builder, the image selector, and the .NET DLL importer tools are all built using .NET 6. However, there are a few features that are still require .NET 4. Those include the data window blob control, XL12 support, and the PowerBuilder runtime packager. As I mentioned, ADO.NET has also been upgraded, so the only drivers that are supported now with ADO.NET are ODBC, Oracle, and SQL Server. And runtime packager has been upgraded so that those are the only things you can select when you indicate that you are using ADO.NET. Also, there's a DLL that was previously called sybase.powerbuilder.datasource.sharing.dll. That's been, it's used for sharing ADO.NET database connections. That's been upgraded and it's been renamed as appion.db.sharing.dll. In the source control enhancements, you're familiar with the system tree, and you right-click on objects in the system tree, and you get the right mouse button pop-up menu, and it has source control options in it. Those weren't available in the library painter. That's been resolved in this version, where you can now do the source code control operations from the library painter as well. So it looks like this. So this is a project. It has to be connected to source control first. So this is a project that I have in Git, and now instead of using the system tree, I can go into the library painter and do source control operations there as well. And let's just pop back to the agenda for a second, just to see where we're at. Okay, we're in modern graphing, so we're getting towards the end here. So by modern graphing, we don't mean that there are new graph types or styles. What's meant here is that the look of the existing graphing options has been improved. So you may have seen it sometimes with some of the line graphs. The lines will look like a staircase rather than a straight line. And the colors are pretty bright. and those have been rendered now into a little bit more pastel colors. So it makes it a little less jarring, I guess. So here's an example of the graphing to date through PowerBuilder 2022 GA. And one example there, it's pretty hard to see on this slide, but on that graph right there, that looks like a little staircase rather than a straight line. Notice how the bullet points are actually fairly large. And notice just how the colors are just kind of bright. And we compare that to what we get in R2. Now we get nice pastel, nice softer colors. The lines are straight. These bullet points have been reduced. So just compare that once again. This versus that is the difference as far as improving the looks of the graphs. Okay, next we're going to talk about strict encryption for SQL Server. In prior releases, if you went to look under the encryption type for SQL Server, you would see true and false. There's now a third option, strict. Now, the first thing you have to do is you actually have to go to the SQL Server and configure it for strict encryption, because strict encryption requires a certificate that you're going to use to do the encryption. And then once that's set up, once the server's configured so it requires strict encryption, then you can't talk to it unless you are also doing strict encryption from the client. So we're actually going to walk through how to do that. Before we get there, though, this is what it looks like in setting up for in PowerScript, how you specify the encryption. So for the OLADB driver, it's in the provider string, you say encrypt equals strict, where the previous options were true and false there. For ADO.NET, it's in the provider string, encrypt equals strict. Notice what I don't have here is the native driver. That's because this is not supported in the native driver. So if you do want to use this feature, you will have to use OLADB or ADO.NET. So this is how you're going to configure the SQL Server to support this. Now, what I show you here, this is a PowerScript command that can be used to generate a self-signed certificate. That's something you might want to do if you just want to try out the feature. That's not something you're going to want to use in production. So, but if you do decide to use this, where it says WS Amazon here, that's the machine name for my Amazon workspace. You're going to replace that with the name of the server that the SQL Server is running on. And then that will give you a self-signed certificate. And if you're going to do it production, you're going to follow all these same steps. You're just not going to do it with a self-signed certificate. So here's the self-signed certificate that got generated. It gets generated in the personal certificates folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag that over into the trusted root certificate authorities. Now, if this was a third-party certificate, the third-party certificate root would be in trusted root certificates, and your personal one would still be in the personal certificates. We need to put that there just because this is a self-signed certificate. The next thing we're going to look at here is we're going to go to right-click on the certificate. We're going to go to the properties. We're going to go to the General tab, and under certificate purposes, we're going to make sure the only thing that's selected is server authentication. If client authentication is selected as well, when you go into the SQL Server configuration, it won't let you use the certificate. So make sure that only server authentication is checked there. The other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to make sure that the account that SQL Server is running on has access to the private keys of that certificate. So we right-click on the certificate, go to All Tasks, Manage Private Keys. When this dialog comes up, we're going to find the account that the SQL Server is running under. In my case, it's running MS SQL Server. And then I'll give it full control to the private key. Now we're in the SQL Server Configuration Manager. We'll go to the protocols for MS SQL Server. go to properties for that, where it says force strict encryption. We set that's the yes, and then we're going to click the certificates tab. And what should appear in this drop-down list box is that certificate we created. If that doesn't appear, then we made some mistake when we created the certificate, like we had client authentication checked as well. But if that does appear there, then select that, and then you'll need to restart the server for the strict encryption to start being enabled. Now we're going to go into our PowerBuilder client, and this is how we specify it in the dialogues, the database connection dialogues. So you go to the driver specific tab, scroll down to where it says encrypt, and now instead of true and false, it will say true, false, and strict. We'll click strict. And this is what it looks like in the preview there. And you saw this also early on when I was showing you what it looked like when you're going to do it in PowerScript. So this is my demo code, and I'll show you the demo here in a second. So notice I've just added a button that indicates whether or not I want to use strict. And then, so I say encrypt equals strict if I'm going to use strict encryption, otherwise false, or you could provide nothing regarding encrypt there as well if you didn't want to do encrypt. But this is how we're going to indicate we want to do strict encryption. So let's go ahead and take a look at that demo. So this is the demo for the SQL Server strict encryption. First thing we'll do is look at I'm using ADO.NET here to talk to SQL Server. And we go in here and we look at the driver specific tab, scroll down here, and there's the encrypt setting, and it can be true, false, or strict. Strict being higher than true, actually. And then I've got the SQL Server instance on this machine configured so it will only accept a strict connection. So if I go over here and connect, we connected. If I go in here and let me disconnect, edit that, change that, encrypt to, let's say, true, and then tap to connect. Boom. It has to be on strict in order to actually connect to the database. So we see that that is working. Turn this back on. Okay. And then if there's not a whole lot to the demo app here. I just basically attempt to connect to the database. This checkbox determines whether or not I use strict or not. So if we look in the code, and you actually saw this from the slides, I check to see if the strict is set, and if so, I set the encrypt equal to strict. Otherwise, I set the encrypt equal to false. So let's go ahead and we say we'll try connect first, and we got that same error message we did from the PowerBuilder IDE. But however, if I say use strict, then I can connect to the database. So that's pretty much all there is to it. All right. That's the SQL Server strict encryption. Okay, moving on. The migration assistant has been upgraded. It will list the obsolete or removed features. Now, I want to point out here is the migration assistant doesn't change your source code. It's what you want to, it's the first thing you want to run when you're looking at upgrading to this version of PowerBuilder. Don't just attempt the migration. I'm going to have another session here where I'm going to talk about how to do a migration to 2022 R2. But run this first, and it will tell you what you need to address, and then you use your existing version of PowerBuilder, not the new one, to address those issues before you attempt the migration. So this on the left is the 2022 GA version of the Migration Assistant. This over here on the right is the 2022 R2. Notice that everything from 12.6 or earlier has been collapsed into a single version now. And then, of course, 2022 R2 has been added here because we need to check for the features like DDE that have been rendered obsolete in this version. And so this is an example of output I got from that. Running it on, this happened to be some PowerBuilder 9 code using PFC. And so the iNet object is obsolete. It captured that. The connection object is obsolete. It copied that. Now these were just in the PFC, base PFC layer. They weren't actually used in the code. So I was actually able to migrate this application with no problems. But, just an indication of the things you need to look for, maybe remove before you attempt the migration. Okay, and that's the end of the presentation. So it's time for questions and answers.